Good evening, everyone. This week's Parshas Pekudei, Tafshin Pei Beis. Hold on one second. That's better. Okay, so the beginning of Parsha, we have a reckoning of all the amounts of the precious metals, all the donations that were given. There's an accounting, an exact counting, how much of each. And the Medrash tells us that Moshe Rabbeinu did this for a very specific reason. I'll read to you from the Medrash. V'lama asa imayim cheshbon. Why did Moshe make this accounting for them? HaKadosh Baruch Hu yisbarach shmai maminoi. God himself trusts Moshe. Shenamar, as it says, Lokein Abdi Moshe b'chol beisi ne'emanu. Moshe is my most trusted, is the most trusted in my house, God says. So, V'lama amar lahem Moshe boi v'nasek mishka v'nachshav lefneichem. Why was it necessary for Moshe to go ahead and say, I'm going to make an accounting for you? Ela sheshama Moshe leitzona Yisrael medaber me'acharav. Moshe heard the letzonim, the scoffers. Leitzonis usually means when you make fun of something, and not necessarily making fun in a true way, but trying to ridicule, trying to mock, and trying to lower. He heard the scoffers of the Jewish people speaking behind his back. Shenemar, as it states, now in Parshas Kisisa, the Torah tells us that after Moshe came down from Har Sinai with the second tablets, from then on, Moshe had his tent, his special tent where he received everyone. And when Moshe would leave his home, his tent, and walk there, everybody would come outside of their tents out of respect to Moshe and watch until he got to his place. And when he got to his place where he received everyone, actually they saw how the cloud of glory, the divine presence of God, came down and spoke with him. So every day, the Jewish people are coming out of their tents to watch Moshe as he walked to the tent. And so he's passing them by and they're behind him. So what were they saying? So according to one opinion of the Medrash, Chame kadal davrei da'amram, which means, look how heavy his neck is. Look how healthy he looks. Look how, he looks like he takes care of himself well. Okay, that's what one person would say. Now I was trying to respond, Adam sheshalat amalechas hamishkan. Someone who has control, someone who has all the control over the construction of the Mishkan, over all the monies that come in. What do you have, a question that becomes rich? He had the control over all those monies. When Moshe heard this, sounds like he actually heard it. Moshe said, when the Mishkan will be completed, that's what I'm going to make a calculation, make a full accounting. And that's what it means. Pekudei Mishkan the accountings of the tabernacle. So Moshe felt a need to have to dispel this leitzonis, this scoffing, this mocking, because they were saying that Moshe became rich off of the donations of the Mishkan that were given towards the construction of the tabernacle. Now, the commentary of Bar Yosef says that, and even though the Mishnah says that they went ahead, the Medrash says that they looked at his neck and they saw how healthy he looked, the Bar Yosef says that's really not enough to say that just based on that. He saw how Moshe looked so healthy. It must be that he's taking money from the treasury. Now, clearly these are people who are after Moshe. They've got something against him, they're after him. But to just go ahead and make up some kind of story like that, just to say things out of the blue, just to say things because he's in good shape. I mean, Moshe Rabbeinu just came down from Har Sinai. He didn't eat and drink for 40 days, 40 nights. So they understand what kind of individual Moshe is. And so because he looks healthy, Moshe, when he died, still looked like a young man. That's going to be enough of a reason to make up this kind of mockery of him. So the Ber Yosef explains it like this, that it didn't start just from the fact that Moshe looked healthy. It actually started from the fact that we know that the Jewish people left Egypt very wealthy. They were told to go and ask for gold and silver from their neighbors, from their Egyptian neighbors. And they did so. And not only that, and they left they left with lots of riches. After the splitting of the Red Sea and the Egyptians were drowned, there too, the Egyptians had decorated all their chariots and their horses with precious jewels and beautiful things. And when they were all drowned, it says they floated all up to the top and the Jewish people gathered together. The Jewish people became very wealthy. Moshe, though, says the Ber Yosef, as far as we can suggest that he never became that wealthy. He never became wealthy from that, because we know that while the Jewish people were asking for the gold and silver, Moshe was busy searching for the remains of Yosef to fulfill the promise they had made to him that when they leave Egypt, they'll take the remains with him. And that's clearly pointed out by the Medrash. They were busy doing that. Moshe's busy doing that. Now, we do know, though, there was a point that Moshe did become wealthy. How did that happen? So there's a Medrash that says that when Hashem said to Moshe, Psal locha shnei luchos avonim, engrave for yourself 2 tablets, meaning before Moshe went back up on Har Sinai to receive the Torah again, to receive the second tablets, actually Moshe had to carve out the tablets, bring them onto the top of Mount Sinai. God engraved it with the 10 Commandments, and he brought it back down. Now, these tablets weren't just made out of stone. They were actually made out of a precious, according to the Medrash, they're called stone, but what kind of stone we're talking about? We're talking about precious metal, or precious stone, rather. And the Medrash says that when Hashem said to Moshe, Psal lacha, engrave for yourself, or chisel out for yourself, it means that whenever you carve something, there's going to be shavings. And Hashem said, Psal lacha, the shavings, which is related to the word psolas, the stuff that you don't want, the stuff that you don't need, the waste, so to speak, that's yours. Another opinion is that actually Hashem opened up a mine from the ground under his tent, under his personal tent, where there were precious stones. And the Medrash says that Hashem said, Dinu sheyitol oisim pselis Moshe. The Medrash going back on the fact that he became wealthy from the shavings of the precious stones that the luchas, that the tablets were carved from. The Medrash says, God said, Dinu sheyitol oisim pselis Moshe. It's only right for Moshe to take those shavings. Why? Because when everybody else was busy gathering gold and silver in Egypt before they left, Moshe was busy trying to find the remains of Yosef. So as a result, he was given those shavings that he also should become wealthy. Okay. So therefore, says the Ber Yosef, that if that's how Moshe became wealthy, so it's a very strong argument to say that until this point of time, Moshe was not wealthy. Moshe did not have all the things the Jewish people took from Egypt, and all the things that the people took from the Red Sea. It would seem that Moshe didn't take that, because the wording of the Medrash is that God says, I'll give him the shavings so that he should become wealthy. That implies until now he wasn't wealthy. We understand that he didn't take from the gold and silver when they left Egypt, because he was busy with the bones of Yosef. If the Medrash implied that he become rich until he got the shavings, it would seem like he didn't take from what floated up to the top of the Red Sea that the Jewish people took from the Egyptians that drowned. Moshe became wealthy from those shavings of the carved out tablets. Okay. So the Ber Yosef wants to suggest that because of that, we could say that, so until Moshe goes up to receive the second tablets, or to have the second tablets engraved, Moshe is not a rich man. Moshe is not wealthy like the rest of them. Now, as soon as he carved out those tablets, he went up to the top of Mount Sinai. Then he came down, and then when he came down, they started the construction of the Mishkan. So the Ber Yosef wants to suggest that when Moshe came back down, and again was involved in the construction of the Mishkan, that's when people started noticing that he was wealthy because he had those shavings by then. Now, right when he carved out the tablets, he went up on Mount Sinai. After he came back down, and he was back down, and things started getting Moshe started getting involved in what has to be done for the construction of the Mishkan. Well, then they see that Moshe became wealthy because Moshe became wealthy. This is the point where the Ber Yosef wants to say that until Moshe came back down with the second tablets, and which was when they started, Moshe came back down. He told the Jewish people about the construction of the Mishkan. They donated, they started building, they started constructing. Until then, they didn't have any time to notice Moshe Rabbeinu's wealth. Moshe Rabbeinu's wealth, which again came from the shavings of the tablets, became noticeable to them when he came back down and he was back with the people, which was the same time that he was in control of all the monies coming in to the Mishkan. So the Jewish people see suddenly he's wealthy. That's strange. How did that happen? So this already gave the Latzadim, the scoffers, the mockers, the ones who wanted to tear Moshe down or put him down, let's say, this was their chance. Moshe Rabbeinu suddenly became wealthy. How did that happen? So what did they say? They said, well, the first one says, hey, look how healthy he looks. Look how meaty he looks. The other one says, no, what do you expect? He's in control of all the money. They said that because there was something strange here. How did Moshe Rabbeinu also become wealthy? Now, was this true? Now, would anybody have believed this? Would anybody have believed that Moshe would be stealing the money from the Mishkan? Moshe, who just spent 120 days on top of Mount Sinai. Moshe, who everybody saw clearly God speaking to him, received the Torah. Moshe is the closest connected to God. He is going to steal from the money going towards the construction of the Mishkan, the construction of the tabernacle, the sanctuary of God. That makes absolutely no sense. Makes no sense. But that's the power of Litzanis. That's the power of mockery. If you want to go ahead and tear someone down, you find a good way to make fun, and maybe that way making fun is not even true. It's not true, and most people understand it's not true. But it's a good line. It's funny. It's sharp. And that kind of Litzanis, that kind of mockery, making fun, making jokes, can eventually become accepted. You know, Korach, when he wanted to take the people away from Moshe, the Medrash says he also used the power of Litzanis, of mockery. And he made up this whole story with Moshe and Aaron. That story, most people knew probably wasn't true. It wasn't true. But through mockery, Korach's trying to make a point of how Moshe and Aaron are taking advantage of everything. And they take everything for themselves. Well, these people, these Leitzanim, were trying to do the same thing. They also, for some reason, had it in from Moshe. It doesn't say why, but they had it in from Moshe. Every leader, there are always people having it in for them. And that was the chance that they suddenly saw Moshe became wealthy. This was their chance to go after him. And they did it in a really interesting way. Because also he became wealthy. Well, how did that happen? So one guy says to his friend, hey, look how healthy he looks. The other one says, what do you expect? He's in charge of all the money of the Mishkan. This was the Litzanis. This was the mockery that they were making, that they were saying. They were putting down Moshe. And Litzanis and mockery is a very powerful thing. As we see, Korach succeeded through his mockery to get the Jewish people to come and to consider. Moshe understood this is very dangerous to allow this to continue. And once he heard it, he said, okay, after we're done, we're going to make a public accounting. Everything is going to be clear. There's going to be transparency. And you'll see there is nothing missing. Nothing's missing. I have a complete accounting of all the monies. Nothing's missing. So what we do see from here is how serious Moshe Rabbeinu took the Litzanis, the mockery being made of him. And even though it wasn't serious and was highly unbelievable, nonetheless, that's the power. That's the power that when you mock someone, you can tear them down. And by these people saying it, there was that very great danger. Moshe had to dispel it. There's another way that we can explain why Moshe felt it so important to make this accounting. And that is based on a very interesting concept that actually comes from the Shkolim. In Parshas Kisisa, the Torah tells us that that the Jewish people should give a half shekel towards the census, towards their accounting. But Rashi comments that the giving of the shekel is mentioned, the half shekel is mentioned 3 times, and that we're talking about more than one donation of a half shekel. And one of the donations we're talking about is how the Jewish people had to give a half shekel towards the Karbanos Tzibur, towards the communal sacrifices. There are sacrifices brought for the entire Jewish people. The way they have a share in that is by giving the monies to be able to purchase what's needed for those sacrifices. And it is actually from Parashas Kisisa that we have that mitzvah of a yearly giving of a half shekel when the Beis HaMikdash was around towards the communal sacrifices. Now the Mishnah in Shkolim, which is the tractate of Mishnah dedicated to Shkolim, says that all the monies that were collected from the Jewish people, the collection, announced collection started Rosh Chodesh Adar, and everything had to be in by Rosh Chodesh Nisan, because Rosh Chodesh Nisan was the beginning of the new fiscal year for the sacrifices. The monies that you were going to use, the monies for the year could only come from those new half shekels that were donated towards the coming year. All those monies were collected and they were stored in a special chamber in the Beis HaMikdash, full of coins. 3 times a year, a Kohen would go in with a box and fill up the box with coins, and those coins would then be used. It was done 3 times a year, and those coins were the ones that were actually used for purchasing the communal sacrifices. The Mishnah there says that the Kohen who went in had to make sure that he was not wearing the pargid chafis. He wasn't wearing any clothing that had a hem on it. He couldn't go in with a shoe, not with a sandal, not with his tefillin, not with an amulet. He couldn't go with anything that anybody could suspect that he's sticking money into. Now, the Mishnah there doesn't just say, well, people are going to suspect him of doing it. There's always got to be some kind of a basis to be able to make your accusation. And the Medrash says, what's going to happen? Shema Ya'ani, maybe this Kohen is going to become poor. He's going to lose his money. And then people are going to say, "May Oven Alishkani, I became poor. It's a punishment because he's been stealing from that chamber with all the money." And if he becomes wealthy, they're going to say, how he became wealthy? He's been stealing money. He stole money from the chamber that had all the half shekels in it. Now, the Medrash doesn't stop there. The Medrash says, gives us a reason. We don't want people to accuse you. Well, because people are making up stories about me, I have to worry about that. Says the Medrash, says the Mishnah, a person has to make sure that he is considered innocent in the eyes of people, as one has to be innocent in the eyes of God. And this is based on a pasuk, on a verse in the Torah. You shall be clean, you shall be innocent from God and from Israel. You have to be nucky, you got to be clean, you got to be innocent, meaning without suspicion in the eyes of God and in the eyes of people. Now that verse is really talking about where the tribes who didn't want to enter the land of Israel, they want to take their portion on the other side of the Jordan River. And Moshe tells them, well, you can only do it if you agree to fight with the Jewish people to conquer the land of Israel. And Moshe says, and if you'll keep that promise, then you'll be innocent, you'll be clean from God and from Israel and Israel. Meaning you will be vindicated. You'll be clean. You'll have kept your promise and you'll have done what you're supposed to do. And you'll be clean, innocent in the eyes of God and the eyes of people. That's the context of where this verse is said. But it's from these words our sages use this verse to bring out a point. You got to be clean. You got to be innocent. You have to be free of suspicion from God, who knows everything, and from the Jewish people. People shouldn't suspect you of things. Well, Moshe had to make sure that there should be no suspicion of his actions. If there's anybody who has to be clean, if If anybody has to be free of suspicion, it's a Talmud Chacham, it's a Torah scholar. It's a person that people expect more from. It's really an obligation on anybody not to have any suspicion cast on them. But all the more so a person who's a Torah scholar. And there's a fascinating tshuva responsa from Rav Moshe Sofer, who's known as the Chassam Sofer. And there was some kind of a question that was posted by a student, and he said like this: "Know, my son and student, that my whole life I have been troubled by the verse, the Yisen Nikia Me Hashem Yisrael, and you shall be clean in front of God and Israel. And these two obligations, we have to be clean from God and clean from Israel, his nation, are two paired riders on our backs. But it is much easier to fulfill the first obligation, meaning innocence in the eyes of God, much, much more than to fulfill one's obligations regarding people. For they think strange thoughts, and the weavers speak of them by moonlight," meaning people are very quick to make up stories and to talk about it. This is an English translation of what he wrote. And then he continues that this is a very serious obligation. This emerges from the Talmud at the end of the chapter, at the end of chapter Yom Kippurim, regarding desecrating God's name, such as where a rabbi purchases meat but does not pay right away. That's an example. Did he do anything wrong, the rabbi? No. But people expect more. People expect that he should pay right away. And if he doesn't, that's desecration of God's name. Another person maybe could get away with it. That's okay for another person. Torah scholar has to be especially careful that he doesn't do things in a way that people should speak badly of him. And it's very interesting that the Chassam Sofer puts these two ideas together, to be innocent and not to cause a desecration of God's name. Now, in our great iniquity, people commonly talk about how such a studious person is such and such. It is common in their mouths, even if it's just a suspicion, meaning he did something. And it creates suspicion. There's suspicion, they're going to start talking about him. And in this case, even if the studious person acted properly in the eyes of God as much as possible, but not carefully enough, such that some drunkards made a mistake about him and wrote mocking songs about him, he has been caught. Mail. Sorry about that. He has been caught in their trap. It's very clear. He did what he could to be clean. But there is still some place for suspicion. And what do? Some drunkards made a song about it. Not good. That's not good. That's not being innocent in the eyes of God and people. You have to make sure there's no suspicion. And especially a Torah scholar that can create a desecration of God's name. Even if people are making up stories. But if he didn't do what he's supposed to do to make sure that doesn't happen, he's responsible. That's how severe, that's how serious this obligation is. Not to cause suspicion, and of course not to cause a desecration of God's name. And therefore, perhaps for this reason, Moshe also had to make sure that what these people are saying, besides the fact that it's mockery, it's honest, it's scornful, which can bring down Moshe and people aren't going to respect him anymore, Moshe also had to fulfill an obligation that no one should be able to there should be no suspicion of what he's doing. And once he heard these words, Moshe and their studies got to make sure that he stays clean. There should be no suspicions whatsoever. And as Chassam Sofer says, this is a very serious thing. You know, if we talk about don't do things that people will say, will accuse you of things. Don't act in a way that people will accuse you. And, you know, especially if when this relates to non-Jewish people, how we have to make sure that we don't give them any kind of excuse to go after us. Now, you may say, when it comes to certain people, no matter what we do, they're never happy. And anything we do, they're going to use it against us. So what should we do? Do nothing? It's a very good question. You can't do nothing. There are things that you have to do. But we have to make sure to do our best not to create any kind of suspicion. There are sometimes people say things, people do things, they think it's okay to say it because, hey, I'm right and they're wrong. we have an obligation not to arouse suspicion on ourselves. And especially when it can be a desecration of God's name, whether it be in front of Jews and non-Jews. I'm going to give you an example, a possible example. Again, this didn't happen, but just a theoretical example, but based on something that happened. Maybe some of you heard about the fact that I think it was Hanukkah time. There was a busload of Jewish students who had gone to downtown London for a Hanukkah trip, and their bus was assaulted by Muslim youth who were doing Heil Hitler, hand salutes. And there was no violence perpetrated, but clearly they were, assaulted. And somebody on the bus took a video of it, and the video went out. And when the BBC reported about it, the BBC reported that someone on the bus said, "Dirty Muslim." Now, here we have a busload of people that are being attacked. But it was really important to have to mention that somebody on the bus said, "Dirty Muslim." Now, at the end of the day, it wasn't true. Because when the people on that bus saw the BBC reported it, they actually brought in a forensic expert, a forensic person who could, listen to the whole video and, show that, there was nobody said that. And he did. And actually, he didn't know the what was taken to mean dirty Muslim was Hebrew words that meant something like, we need to do something about this. But Hebrew words had no connection. But that's what they did. And even though it was shown that no one said that line, of course, the BBC did not take it back, did not apologize. Eventually, they said, a mistake may have been made. Or we were never using that in order to diminish what happened, but no apology. Okay, not surprising. But I was thinking, what if somebody would have said that? Do you think it's possible that somebody could have said that? That here they are being attacked by these youth, and therefore, what do? They said a line about them. They made a slur about them. Now, a person may say, well, we're being assaulted. And there was no reason for the BBC to have to say that. That takes away from the whole story. It makes it sound like we brought it upon ourselves. That's not right. All those claims and arguments may be there. But what do you need to say it for? We have to be so careful what we do and say nowadays because there's cameras and there's videos and there's phones. People are constantly videoing things. And that was happening on that bus. So if somebody would have been, I would say stupid enough to have done that, if that really would have happened, that person would have given the BBC a chance to have a heyday. And they tried. I shouldn't say heyday. And here, thinking that's what he said, of course they reported it. Very important to report it. Very important to have to go ahead and diminish what's going on. Maybe even bring suspicion upon the students that they brought it on themselves. It didn't happen. What if it would have happened? That would have been so careless. Why are you doing something that can bring suspicion on you? I'm not saying anybody did it. I'm saying it's an example. I was thinking, what if somebody would have done it? And we know it could have happened. Let's be honest. It could have happened. It could happen when people are under that kind of stress. They can make a line about those people. But that would have been an example of when you say that, you're bringing suspicion upon yourselves. And we have to be so careful. We have to be very careful. The Yisem Nikiyim. We need to be clean. We may not bring suspicion upon ourselves. We're going to be in the eyes of other Jews, especially when we are Torah Jews and people are looking at us and our behavior. Be very careful about what we do not to bring any suspicion upon ourselves, whether it be from our friends, our neighbors, people who know us well, or people who don't know us well, and especially when it comes to non-Jews. It's a great responsibility, but a very, very important one. Because we would never want to bring suspicion upon ourselves. We never want to bring a desecration of God's name, but rather to act and speak in a way that people will see the Jewish people and understand of what it is to be the nation of the Torah. Have a wonderful Shabbos, a good Chodesh Tov, all the best.